I'm the technical lead of the MyMaps team in Google Maps. MyMaps is a tool to allow users to create content on a map and share it with other users. But I'm not going to be talking about MyMaps today. I'm going to be talking about what, to me, is the most exciting aspect of Google Maps, which is the Maps API. Now, just by a show of hands, how many people here have used the Maps API? OK, so a few. How many people have ever written any code in JavaScript? OK, a few more. I'll be giving some examples of JavaScript code, but I don't assume that anyone in the audience knows JavaScript. Also, I would like to encourage anyone to interrupt me. This is most useful if the things I talk about are actually relevant to what all of you are interested in. And the Maps API is a very big topic. There's no way that I could possibly do it justice in 45 minutes. So if you have specific questions that I'm not addressing, you should feel free to let me know. Google's mission, as I'm sure all of you know, is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, this is actually a rather audacious goal, right? And pretty open-ended, right? But I think understanding this mission is really important to understanding everything that Google does, including the things we do in the Geo group, which includes Google Maps, Google Earth, and SketchUp. Google is not a software company. Right? Google is not a mapping company. We might incidentally write software or develop mapping software, but that's not our primary mission. And a lot of the things we do are not going to make sense if you think of us as a software company. Our mission is to organize the world's information. Now, one way to organize information is a web index. Right? That's a nice way to allow users to organize very unstructured information, just based on keywords that appear in the text in web pages. But there are other ways of organizing the information. Right? Much of the world's information has a geospatial content, and a great way of organizing that is geospatially. Right? So we can have a geospatial index. And another part of this mission is to make the information universally accessible and useful. An important aspect of being useful is displaying it in the context that makes the most sense for the information. If you run a business and you want to see the locations of all your franchises or look at the locations of all your trucks or whatever, a great way to do that is to display it on a map. Right? So Google is not writing mapping software to produce the map. The map is just a means to an end, and that end is to display the world's information geographically. Now, I also want to draw attention to the world's information. Right? Google is also not primarily a data provider. There are some particular services that we have that involve data from users, such as, for instance, Picasa and Blogger and things like that. But we're not interested in creating walled gardens, right? Some of the world's information actually happens to come from our competitors, and we're not interested in excluding that information just because it happens to come from a competitor. And we're also not interested in blocking our competitors from accessing information just because it happens to live on Google servers. Right? This is all about organizing the world's information. Universally accessible is a big challenge for us. Many people in the world, particularly in the developing world, don't have access to laptop computers or desktop computers. They're primarily accessing information using cell phones and with very slow internet connections. And so one of our goals is to provide ways of making information available to those users, for instance, through Google Maps for mobile and other sort of mobile platforms. So this is just to kind of give you an overview of where we're positioning ourselves, what we're thinking of in terms of what we do and the decisions that we make. Now, to make the world's information truly useful, we need to provide ways of displaying the information in a way that's most useful to whatever goal someone's trying to accomplish. And this is a real challenge because for a lot of very specialized uses, it might be for researchers or science researchers or bird watchers or hikers, the ideal way of accessing that information is going to be very specialized to that particular domain. And Google can't possibly develop all the different specialized user interfaces for all of these different applications. What we can do, though, is provide open APIs to allow developers to write these applications on top of Google's services as a platform, which is why the Google Maps API. So the Maps API is a tool that allows us to collaboratively with developers and researchers organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. There are over 100,000 active Maps API sites. We know that because every API site has to have a key specific to that site in order to access our services. And so we track those keys. And so by active, I mean, in any given week, at least this many different unique API sites are using the Maps API. Now, not all of these sites are equally useful or equally impressive, but many of them are very impressive. And I just want to give you sort of a little feel for some of them. This site is called housingmaps.com. It was developed by a fellow named Paul Rademacher, who actually now works for Google, although he didn't at the time that he developed this site. And what it is, it's a mashup of Google Maps and housing listings from Craigslist. So using this site, I can search for housing. I can specify the price range I'm interested in, what city I'm interested in. These markers tell me different information. The yellow markers indicate that the listing contains a photo. So I can click on one of these yellow markers and see a photo of the house. If I wanted to, I can zoom in and look at particular neighborhoods. This is a really useful way of accessing the information on Craigslist, right? Which is what I mean by making the world's information useful. So that information was there, but it's much more useful if it's displayed on a map.
Do they rely on your geolocation queries to locate them?
I believe that they do. I don't think Craigslist has lat-longs associated with these things. So yeah, this I think necessarily uses the uses geocoding queries. So basically, just takes the address and submits it as a geocode request. I believe that's the way it works. I haven't actually looked at the code for it. This site is a Tour de France map. And this is using Google Street View to show the location of the riders. If the race were actually going on right now, this map would actively track the riders in the Tour de France. And I can look at any of the routes. I can use Street View to kind of pan around and get a feel for it, or click on the little navigational arrows to move around. I can also click on a particular part of the route if I want to see, like for instance, what one of the mountain. This doesn't look very mountainous, but there you go. One of the mountain parts of the route look like. Here's a map showing the effects of what the effects of a particular amount of sea level rise, from global warming would have on a particular part of the country. So I can just select what I think the worst case scenario is, and then see what parts of the city are going to be flooded. Right. So I live in San Francisco, so it's relevant to me, whether, my house would be flooded if the sea level rose. And there are lots of other examples. There's various maps showing, locations from Wikipedia. This one here is using Google Sky and showing showing videos of different parts of the sky. So I'm not going to wait for this to load. Anyway, as I said, there's 100,000 of these sites. So what can you do with the Maps API? Well, as I said, our organizing principle is to organize the world's information. And so really, you can think of the capabilities we provide as a way of doing that. So first of all, an API site is a program written in either JavaScript or Flash. Obviously, if you want to display information on a map, you need to display a map. And you can display any of the maps that you could display on maps.google.com, including now something actually you can't yet do on maps.google.com, and you can't currently do in all browsers, and that's view the Earth in 3D using a 3D Earth plugin, which incidentally was developed by Paul Rademacher, the person who wrote the housing map site. So you can display your own data on the map, right? Because some of the world's information might be something you own or something you want to mash up from some other site like Craigslist. You can display Google's information and access Google's information. And you can get information from users, right? So some of the information comes from the community at large. That's something that's very near and dear to my heart working on the MyMaps team. Whenever there's a major event like a natural disaster, you can go to maps.google.com and search for, like for instance, I was traveling when the bridge in Minneapolis collapsed, and I searched for Minneapolis bridge collapse on Google Maps after I'd kind of exhausted all the major news sources and found lots of just community-created maps, people who were on the scene taking pictures with their cell phone cameras and whatnot, describing firsthand personal experiences of what was going on. It was much better information than anything I could get from any of the news sites. Similarly, many other natural disasters, fires, last year in Southern California, some great maps produced by people at KPBS and lots of ordinary users. Okay, so how do you actually do this? How does this work? Well, it's very simple. This HTML is enough to embed a map in your own, embed a Google map in your own web page. The key here is this URL, maps.google.com. You say file equals API, specify what version you want. and then an API key that just identifies your site. It's free use, but you need a key for it. And then you can write whatever kind of JavaScript code you want. So I'll show you some examples of some JavaScript. So can anyone tell me what this code does? Okay, yeah, so we have a geocoordinate here. Right, so, okay, yeah, so it's going to set the map to a particular location. And what about this? Any guesses on what that does? Sorry?
When it pans when the timeout occurs to the new location, which is just a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. So we run this code and just goes there, waits a little while, and then pans over to another location. So one of the things you can do through the API is just display locations, animate the map, respond to timeouts or other things, as I'll discuss. What about this? What does this code do? Sorry?
Do you have an inset or something? Or inset?
Yeah, so it's adding two things to the map, adding two insets to the map. So let's run this. Right, so we have a little bar there, to pan and zoom, and a little selector to select the different map types. So, so the add control method on the map object adds some kind of control. It could be a control that you wrote, or it could be one of the built-in controls. And we have a number of these. So the small map control is that guy there, and the map type control is this guy up here. So using this, I could select a different tile set. So this is our terrain map, the hybrid map. Okay. Okay. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. One of the most significant aspects of the Maps API is its event model, its support for user events. So we have this G event object, which can be used to listen to various user-initiated actions on the map. So any guesses on what this code does?
Click on it and put something up there.
Okay, yeah.
Puts a block up.
Yeah. Yeah, so what about this part? Okay, yeah, pretty close. Yeah, so what this does is if I click on it, it adds a marker. If I click on the marker, it just takes the marker away. So anyway, you can respond to click events on the map. You can respond to other types of mouse over events. You can make things draggable. I could, say that this particular marker isn't draggable, but I can, if I change this to, I'll do G event, remove listener. Very good question. I'll get to that in the next slide. Then if I sorry, I change this code to just say draggable true. Now I can click on this guy, and then I can also drag it around. And I can still click to remove. Okay, so you asked about info window. So I can see where I'm going to go. Okay, so here's some code. I'll just show it to you. I now click on this guy. Oh, and I don't know why it scrolled there. And it opens an info window. This says New Delhi. So that's controlled by this code over here. So I add a listener to the marker on the click event. And when this click happens, it calls marker open info window HTML. And then name, which happens to be New Delhi. So this info window can contain any arbitrary HTML. So you can make pretty interesting things. You can do embedded videos or any kind of widgets or whatever you want. Yes?
But you can't click under the info box. In other words, a lot of times you want to be able to move the info box because the info box and the shadow are making that area unprocessable.
Yes, that's true.
And that's a disaster.
Yes, so the comment was that you can't click under the info window. And it's shadow. Yeah, so there's definitely room for improvement. This is by far,
No, I'm just saying that
yes.
it's been years and it's really vexing.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree. It's that's annoying. I think the Earth UI for info windows is much nicer. Among other things, it doesn't always have to scroll the map around to.
Also at the angle, you should be able to move the map labeling. Yeah, what happens is that all this is fine if you just have one label. But if you've got a lot of labels on, then you're in trouble because and the shading is using up a tremendous amount of screen real estate for nothing.
Yeah, you can actually click on markers that are under the info window, but if you want to click on the map, you may be right. And it's probably also browser dependent. Getting things to work reliably in all possible browsers is an interesting exercise.
Do you have to have the shadows or can we eliminate those?
Sorry?
The shadows. Can we eliminate those or?
The shadows and the markers, you can do whatever you want with. You can specifically set the shadow image, and if you don't specify a shadow, then you don't get one. The shadow under the info window is that just kind of comes prepackaged. You can implement your own info window if you want. You can do something, just open up a little div or whatever.
What I was saying was the angle for the is pretty fixed. In other words, that little.
Yes.
And that should be.
Yeah, that's bad for scrolling too, right? It tends, if you have a small window, you open an info window, and it tends to scroll the map down, sometimes so far down that you don't actually see the marker anymore that you clicked on. Yeah, that's a problem.
Sorry.
No need to apologize. That's very useful feedback, and I totally agree with you. I think we should fix it. Okay. So we can also display other things, not just markers. You can display polylines. So here I've just created an array of points, and then created a polyline specifying that point array as an argument. Now this thing is unlike the marker I showed you before, where I could drag it around and click on it and things. This right now is totally interactive, totally non-interactive. Right? I can't click on it. I can't drag. But we recently extended the Polyline API to include mouse events. You now handle mouse over, click, and other things. So let me just show you. And this was something that we added, basically taken out of the MyMaps editing API, and MyMaps editing user interface, and put in the Maps API. So now what I can do is I can create a polyline object with an empty point vector, and add it to the map. And then I call this new method enable drawing, and then clicks on the map. We'll just add points to the line. But now once I've done that, I've double-clicked to end the line. Now it's totally non-interactive again, right? Which isn't very good. So we can extend that. We added methods enable editing and disable editing. Here I'm just adding a listener on mouse over and mouse out events. So anytime I get a mouse over, I'm going to call this enable editing. And when I get a mouse out, I'm going to call this disable editing. So if I run this code, now when I mouse over, I get these little boxes. Note there's two kinds of boxes here. There's the ones at the vertices, which are kind of dark, and then there's the ones in the centers, which are more faded. If I drag a vertex, it just moves that point. But note the ones in the middle, they stay attached to the line. If I drag one of the midpoints, that just adds another point to the line. We can use the enable drawing also to extend a line. What I'm doing here is I'm listening for click events, but I'm looking for this optional index argument, which tells me if I clicked on a vertex, it tells me what vertex I clicked on. So here I'm looking for two specific vertices, either the first vertex or the last vertex. And if I click on the first vertex, I call enable drawing with the from start argument equal to true. And if I click on the last vertex, I call enable drawing with from start equals false. So what that does is, if I say click on this vertex here, right, I can keep adding points to the line. Or if I click on this vertex here, I can add points. But if I click on a point in the middle, it doesn't do anything. Okay. So just to kind of show you how all these things can tie together, this is just a really kind of crude implementation of, very basic implementation of my maps in the Maps API. So here I have the little drawing tools, and so I can click on a marker tool and put a marker down. And you can drag it around. And you know exactly how that works. That's just a Maps API call to enable dragging. If I click on it, it changes the color. That's just listening to the click event. If I draw a polyline, that works just the way I showed you before. I can do the same thing with polygons. If I click on a vertex, it deletes that vertex. So anyway, I'm not going to showing you the code for this, but if you click through from this this URL here, just kind of drill through and look at the HTML, you can see the code for it. It's not very complicated.
Just a very basic question. State storage. Say I now go off a page or close. Is the data actually stored on previous example, that one, on the Google server, or is it gone?
A very good question, and which sort of leads me to my next slide. The answer is, it depends on you, really. The most general solution, the most general. So in this particular example I was showing you. Yeah, so to repeat the question, is the data just gone, or is it saved somewhere? And in that particular example, it's gone, right? It's just stored in the browser state. But there are events that tell you, for instance, when someone's finished drawing something or finished dragging something, right? So you can listen to what the user does and then take an appropriate action, right? And one appropriate action would be just like talk to your own server, right? You could run a database server or whatever. And store the data, however you see fit. You can do that using our library for doing asynchronous HTTP requests. You can do HTTP GET to fetch data from your server, or HTTP post to post data based on a user action. So this example here, I'm just getting data from this file here, data.xml, which is just putting a bunch of points on the screen. But the point is that you can take that data and do whatever you want with it. Something that I'm not specifically talking about in this talk, but we are very soon going to release a data API, a GData API for My Maps. So you can also store, or you will very soon be able to store any of your data directly on Google servers. And all that data will be indexed and accessible through Google search. So if you want to store it on your own servers, you can. If you want to store it on our servers, you can do that also.
Will you be supporting GML?
Sorry?
Will you be supporting GML?
We will not be supporting GML, at least not in the immediate future. We will support KML and GeoRSS. And based on demand, we may add additional
Those are
formats.
essentially subsets.
Yes.
Version.
Yes, exactly.
So can you make some comments on how to search data stored in maps, the different applications that create based on these tools? So you showed in the beginning this list of many applications that have used these tools.
Yes.
Can I somehow search them all? And I say, who has data for this data? And can you show them all?
Yes, so are you talking about searching data that is on Google servers or searching data that's on other? Both. Yes. Yes, yeah. So we have, let's see, I think I have a slide for that. Let me, let me start here with the Geocoder API. I may or may not have a slide for the local search, but I'll talk about that. So this code here is talking to the Google Geocoder. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating a G client geocoder object. And I'm simply passing it an address, in this particular case in Paris. And I just run that code and put a marker on I mean, this code here is putting a marker on the screen based on that location. I could just as well have said, say, Market Street, San Francisco, and Market Street, San Francisco. But we also have an API for local search, which includes geospatial data that Google has crawled from the web. So you can, it includes My Maps, user-created maps. It includes KML, scraped from the web. Other things like GPS tracks. So that information is available and it is searchable through our APIs. So other kinds of information you can display pictures on the map. Here, this is just a kind of small single image. But you could also, if you had very large imagery, there's an API that allows you to display it as tiles. You can zoom in and just see more resolution. That works basically just the way our own servers work.
Is there an API for the map graph, the underlying graph representation for corners and streets?
Yeah, we don't have an API for the vector data. And a big part of the reason for that is it's not really our data. We're licensing it, and our data providers are kind of nervous about making it too easy for people to scrape the data. So not all the data is ours to give away. But if not for that, we'd love to do it.
So in short, we've been using the Maps API to display information related to simulated emergencies for our next generation M1 project when doing work with Department of Transportation. And one of the problems that we have is that much of the data is not directly user-generated. For example, the coverage areas or the location of fire trucks or all of these things come from third-party sources.
Right.
And that's a vehicle tracking system or the various other auxiliary data systems that we want to interface with. So it's a little awkward in the sense it would be nice to have an API that is a protocol API as opposed to a language API.
Yes.
That we can get to the data. Maybe that exists and I just didn't look hard enough to do that.
Yeah, so one of our hopes with the GData API that we're developing is actually that we could encourage other companies to also adopt it, right? That there's no reason it needs to be just an API to get data out of Google servers. It could be an API to get data from other servers into Google or into a particular API site. Right. That's very much in line with what we want to do.
Okay, glad to hear that. So I'll talk to you offline, but
Okay.
There's a active standardization effort ongoing in the IETF on these type of protocol level APIs type of things. So it would be good to coordinate in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so anyway, some other information. You can display traffic, driving directions. So here, I've specified in my query, what locale I want, the directions to be. So the directions here are in French. If I'd specified some other language, they would have been, in that language. Now, these directions here are not interactive. I don't know how many of you have noticed, maybe by a show of hands, how many of you have noticed on maps.google.com you can actually drag the directions around? Okay, good. Most of you, it looks like. Yeah, so that's kind of a nice thing. We don't support it in the API currently. But based on what I've already showed you, right, we could kind of hack that up, right? So I showed you how you could draw and edit polylines. And you can do these queries, driving directions queries. So let's kind of put these together. And now I have code where I can click on points. And it, as I do it, it adds points to a driving directions object. I can go and I can mouse over and drag these. I think I can. Oh, what's happening? Oh, yeah, it's just not. Oh, I'm still drawing. That's the problem. Okay. So I can drag these guys around and update the path. So we try to provide tools that make things kind of maximally useful. So there's also an API for Street View, as you saw from the Tour de France page. So here, all I've done is I've created a new Street View panorama object. I've set it the location to a particular lat long. I set the map location to a particular lat long. And I've added a listener on the pano. Basically, anytime the view changes in the pano, it's going to call this function that's going to change the location on the map. So I can kind of navigate around in here, and it updates the location on the map. So it's not a very interesting example. Here's something a little bit more detailed. Now what I have is I have two things here. I have a camera, and I got this little guy here. The little guy indicates where the camera is looking. And I set this, the little guy to sit right on top of Sutro Tower, which is a very prominent landmark in San Francisco. It's actually an excellent navigational beacon for me because I don't live too far away from it. And so I can tell people anywhere they are in the city. If you head towards Sutro Tower, you'll be kind of heading to my house. So this code basically does the same kind of thing. It says, anywhere the camera moves, I always want to point it back to Sutro Tower. So you can see, you can move this guy around, and wherever it goes, it always pans around, so it's looking at the tower. Now, I can also move the little guy, say over here to Twin Peaks Reservoir, and now the camera moves to the closest location and points at the little guy. And the point is, you can develop some pretty elaborate applications on top of the Maps API. And I think that's all the slides I have. You can find all the documentation that you could possibly hope to find about maps and everything else at Google at code.google.com. And for more specific information about the Maps API, this is a very good website. So thank you. So I guess we have maybe a few more minutes before lunch for questions, or if anyone wants to stay later.
How do you get those pan images with the cameras at any location?
Sorry.
The images you have of the panning, how do you get that from any arbitrary? How do you get the panned images from any arbitrary location?
Okay, we can't actually get the imagery from any location. We can only get the imagery from where the street view vans have actually driven. So the specific request that I'm making is saying, give me the nearest pano to the location that I've specified. And in fact, the second example I showed, actually, the camera will always snap to wherever the location of the nearest pano is. So I can't position it arbitrarily. Yes.
So you didn't talk about another API that we've used in the Google Local API. So if that's not something, we just ask, and you can tell me if that's something I should talk to somebody else about, is one of its applications that we've built is a system that allows you to do ontology-based searches for specific type of businesses. So we have an application that allows you to basically say, I want a movie and a dinner. It should be, the movie and dinner should be within walking distance, and they should be Italian and below $30 type of thing. So one of the difficulties we've had is to get the data for that. And so Google Local obviously is one that offers itself for that. Actually, we have done a bit of scraping for a demo to do just that. But the data is very noisy for obvious reasons.
Right.
And so I wonder if there's any interest, and this came up during the introductory presentation this morning, if there's any interest at all at providing providers of services, such as restaurants, movie theaters, in my example, the opportunity to provide less noisy data. Because the problem you have is you get random street locations, or you get their corporate headquarter address when you're looking for a local McDonald's, which isn't terribly helpful.
Yes, we actually have that. You can go to maps.google.com, and if we're missing a listing, you can add it. If we have incorrect information in the listing, you can correct it. All of that it goes through moderation, but basically in specific countries where we've launched, which includes the United States, you can go and you can fix our data.
But it's only the basic. What I'd like to be able to add, for example, if I'm again to pick up a restaurant example, if I wanted to have a category which says I'm an entree below $30, and I wanted to use that as a tagging vehicle, is it possible to essentially kind of add database fields that you would?
It's not currently, although we definitely intend to do that. It's really entirely a user interface issue, right? Certainly we have all the support for it in the back end. It's just a question of making the user interface to where it's both as powerful as you want it to be, and also not totally overwhelming to a casual user.
Right, and where you could, well, again, some standardization would be very helpful
Yes.
for that. So one of the things that, again, you might find interesting to look at from a standardization perspective, there's a new thing called the service URNs, which describe, are you familiar with that? So it's a new way of labeling specific categories of services, initially emergency services, but others as well. And it would be, I think it would be very nice to have some confluence between those.
Right, yes, I agree. So a combination of having a richer ontology and the ability for users to step outside the ontology, both of these things I think are really important. And yes, absolutely, those are both very much on the radar.